tried to focus this a little bit around what constitutes a resilient landscape, and trying to give some linkage to this, but while knowing that I also have we've worked on this for quite a while, and I was involved in some of the earlier resilience work. I saw when I was going with Janice back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So it's coming back to sort of think about that a bit more. I'm not going to dwell on these things, but just to introduce you to this is a conceptual framework that we use to guide our work to document food systems and landscapes. We link biological diversity as a product of ecological processes and landscapes to the appropriation of biodiversity by rural households and harvesters. We consider this to be a system by which people and landscapes are mutually constructed. As this is a short presentation, I will not go into the details of the framework, but I'd like to point out that we are not just interested in how material practices result in social relations amongst beings of the landscape and the subsequent material structure of the landscape, but also how access is influenced by institutions, perception, and practice. In this slide, I just want to link our conceptual framework to the food security framework and landscapes, ecosystem sort of ideas that were developed by IUCN. And this framework attempts to sort of recognize the linkages between ecosystems and the main concerns of food security policy, usually sort of named as access, availability, and utilization or use in some policy documents. Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on the content of these next 3 slides. I will flash them up. I apologize that I don't have multilingual slides here, but the point of this is that I'm about to present a spatial model, and the spatial model is somewhat abstracted. However, what I want to point out is that these conceptual frameworks, not a model framework, come out of extensive empirical documentation of food systems and the practices and what actually happens to turn biodiversity into things like food and other things people utilize within households. And the work that I want to present is sort of undertaken. The cases we do is a year in the field, and they're done by, in this case, they're all done by PhD students. And it includes long-term physical observations and practices on the land and on the waters, household surveys, and semi-structured interviews. So just to point out that what I'm going to show shortly does have an empirical basis, but for the sake of this presentation and the time length, it will be showing us some schematic diagrams. As I sort of flip through this, I also want to point out that the way to think about what one way to think about what we're documenting, I will point out that one way to think about what we're documenting are the sites of biodiversity harvesting, the sites at which households transform biodiversity into material goods for domestic consumption and exchange, the sites of exchange, and the paths that bring disparate sites into contact. So now to the case and off to the background. Just to point out, this case is undertaken in Ponta Negra in Brazil. I think it's somewhat self-explanatory, and I provided the translators with this text, so hopefully they're translating the details in the slides, so I don't have to read them out. I will just say that for the purpose of our work, we tend to pick small cases, small communities, and it's to somewhat be able to deal with the empirical data that we collect, which is quite extensive. And if we dealt with large communities that were very complicated, it would make it much harder to try and understand the things that we're trying to understand through this work. The next set of slides I'm about to show will sort of unpack a little bit this diagram, and we'll make some sort of simple points through these slides. And all we're trying to do here is really, and again, underlying this diagram is sort of the actual flows of real things that are harvested. So we're trying to show that the main sort of clusters, this is a coastal community, so that there's a main cluster of harvest sites from land and seascapes. The blue is sea, green is forest, orange is coast. The main things that are harvested from these different types of sites. So from the sea, largely what's happening is you have fish from pound net, gear. From the forest, you have forest fruits and game, where animals are harvested from primary and secondary forests, scrubland, home gardens, and shifting agriculture. And then from some of these areas, you have tuberous, spices, firewood, and other things harvested. Along the coast, you have what's called often mariscar, things like fish and seafood, shellfish that are picked up right from the shore using other types of gear. And that looks like this. You have some inshore jigging for squid. You have the pound nets that are utilized to capture fish that sort of move. You have yucca harvested or manioc fields, and different things that are harvested from the forest. This being a very steep landscape that goes down to the sea. Wild passion fruit, sort of a relative of the nutmeg and wild boar. And then other things caught with bamboo poles from the coast. So one of the other things we're interested in is that you have many sites and different things that link up. And one of the other things we wanted to look at in terms of access is what are the things that then enable and constrain mobility across these landscapes to get to these different types of sites. So in this slide, what we're really just showing is how things move and how things flow from different types of sites, and how they move into other sites, how they're transformed, and how things come into the system. So this is really a system diagram. And again, we're showing in red things that come from the sea and the coast. The green is the forest. The black is things that come in from external areas. And we show sort of the places where they move through. So again, just to unpack this a little bit, show you some real things. So this point is in the top left corner. This is the community's access to the land or into the main markets. And below that and to the side of it, you'll see that it's through a gated community that's been established. And you can see that the people access this from Sao Paulo with their helicopters. In the bottom, this one here, you can see their docks, and the community is sort of constrained to one dock in which they can unload their fish in the bottom. And during holiday seasons, their main holiday seasons, they're given their access across this community, which is why the way they reach the markets, is restricted, which in times sometimes when there's more fish. But when the people are there for holidays, they don't want as many community members moving through the community. And again, these are some other key types of sites that make the system work. This is a beach hut, so they fix their nets and do storage and do all those things. These are the type of boats they use to sort of move around, do their squid jigging, do their harvesting, and of course forest paths. And we all know that paths in and of themselves are hard sites as you gather things along the way as you move through the forest to other places to go and things like that. A couple of quick points on timings of the space. So again, here we have this is again color-coded: blue is sea, orange is coast, green is forest. And the point here that we'd like to make is just the seasonality, that the system itself is not just spatially, but it's also seasonal, and that different harvestings occur. That food systems in themselves are made up of a set of sites that provide different things at different times of year, and also require this class mobility to be available and accessible across these different seasons. And just to make a longer point about time, but this table really shows, and it has a number of different years, this table shows how people change what they have harvested and the sites of harvest across historic time, in this case from the 1940s to the present. What is interesting about these communities is that in the 40s they relied much more on forest things. So while now most people would consider them to be more focused on fishing, in fact fishing emerged when markets opened up for the fish and they could actually access those markets. So now they would be considered to be more fishing people, and in the past they were actually more forest people. Okay, so this is the last slide, luckily. So answering the question, what constitutes a resilient food system, of some of our case study work and the work we do, are sort of 4 points. These are complex systems, and they require empirical understanding of structural elements, what we might think of species, if you like, for lack of a better word, harvest sites or habitats. And one thing I think that's missed a lot is the issue of mobility, and infrastructure to allow these things to actually operate. So they require the availability of species and habitats, and the ability to move within the landscape landscapes to both access, process, and exchange the different elements of biodiversity that people utilize. It's important we always keep in mind seasonality, that while things may not be used for much, they may be critical things that people utilize at certain times of the year. And that these things adapt over short periods of time. They're not just sort of, well, when we take it and we document at one point in time, what's important is people have access to all these things that actually can adapt over time. And that is the end. Thank you.
Very quickly, a couple of minutes for questions, points of clarification. I see quite a few new people coming into the room, so I just want to remind you that there is simultaneous translation in Korean, English, Spanish, and French for those who need it. But the floor is open for comments, questions. Yes? Would you like to come up and speak to the microphone, please?
Thank you very much. I'm Paul Simon from Uganda, and I have just 2 points to make. And one is that looking at the concept of food resilience, I think one thing we must acknowledge is that there were times, considering the trends, when we couldn't even think about what is food resilience. Why? Because food was sufficient and it was in abundance. If not in other countries, but in my country, that was the case. But considering the situation now, I think the concept is appropriate. But one question is, why were we not talking about food resilience 20 years ago, and now it is an issue? It takes me to one thing: the indigenous systems and practices, which should be part and parcel of these concepts we are trying to develop in order to ensure food resilience. 2, looking at how IUCN and how other civil society actors work, I think we should be coming up with the complete actions or strategies of how to take these issues forward, especially engaging with governments who control food systems and agricultural practices in these different countries. I think that is my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We shall keep those 2 very important points for the general discussion. We're anticipating on the general discussion, but thank you very much for those contributions. Are there any specific points of clarification, questions on Ian's presentation right now? If not, we move on to the next presentation, which will be given by Liz Hosking and Gathuru Mbulu on the global threats to resilient food systems and how local communities in Africa are responding.
Thanks, Michelle and Mike. Hi, everyone. I don't have a written presentation. But I'm just going to say a few things. Mike asked me to just flag up some of the global threats. And so what I wanted to do was we're hearing about the threats to particular systems globally. And those of us in this room know what resilient systems are, and that the battle is really a battle of power and a globalized system that's going into destroying the systems. I work with, I'm from the Gaia Foundation, and I work with Guru and Katamini Day. And we obviously are working on some things. What happened for us was that about 2 years ago we realized that there was a huge and growing threat in Africa of mining. And we did this report on the global expansion of mining. And since then, what we've been looking at is while specifically on the ground, we're dealing with these threats to these specific systems. Globally, what's happening is we're seeing 2 things. The very conditions for food production being destroyed at the most terrifying rate. And secondly, the propaganda from the industrial food system is we've got to feed this growing population. We have to be efficient. We have to destroy the systems so that we can produce industrial food because that's what's efficient. what we're seeing, I just want to sort of give top line things, which I'm sure you'll know, but it's just for us to really remember that we're dealing with a bigger monster that is controlling the governments, because actually this is a globalized system. So we're seeing land grabbing, as we all know, at a huge rate. In Africa alone, the size of Kenya right now is being land grabbed from around Africa. We're seeing land grabbing for agriculture, for biofuels. We're seeing this enormous increase in land grabbing for mining and extractive industry. And these increasingly less control. We know these are going in not only to traditional systems, but also UNESCO sites and other sites. So there's a huge onslaught that we're seeing, especially since the economic collapse in 2008, when investors are looking for real things, like mining minerals and land. We're seeing a huge water grab that's going along with the land grab, and this is an issue that really is absolutely terrifying, because we know that industrial agricultural systems use huge amounts of water. We know that the so-called regenerative energy biofuels does the same. Mining is just huge amounts of water is required. And we know that actually what's happening now is people are mining for water. In the Patagonia area, that's happening in Australia. We have companies saying that actually the greatest value of the land that they're grabbing is the water. So that is a huge issue, no water, no life. I think the other critical issue that I wanted to raise is obviously what that means is enormous amounts of topsoil being destroyed, biodiversity and genetic erosion obviously goes with it. One of the other issues about mining is not only does it grab huge amounts of land and water and destroy the biodiversity and so on, but in South Africa, an example of the legacy of the gold mining industry is 100 years later. One of the studies shows that up to 80% of South Africa's water will be undrinkable in 3 years' time. So, I mean, this is not just destroying systems immediately, but the legacy is huge. So this is also, this is the context in which we're trying to build resilient systems. And just quickly, I wanted to say, of course, the cost of all this is not only the land and water very conditions of life, but a third of the food produced through the industrial food system is wasted all along the global food chain. We know that hunger is growing, obesity is growing, and the diseases of these industrial foods are also growing. So, sorry to bring such horrible bad news, but it's just really important, I think, that we also think of that larger context in which we're fighting our little battles and how we deal with that. Thank you.
Two-part presentation. Okay. So yes. Did you ask something?
Yes, there is a PowerPoint.
Where is it?
No, that one. No, we had that one already.
What was the name of the PowerPoint?
Where did you get my file from? You had a different set of files.
This one. No, it isn't. This one here. This is yours, isn't it? CJIDH or is it or is it RSK? RSK. Okay. There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
Hello, I'm going to talk about seeds and resilience, but when I was thinking through this process, I later found that when talking about seeds, knowledge, and also thinking about diversity, it's not only diversity about biodiversity, but also diversity in so many other areas. And if we look at this photo here, it's about indigenous crops, and there are two questions that I was that I'm very particular about. One asked about the erosion of indigenous knowledge, and again, the one that was asked by my neighbor from Uganda about again indigenous knowledge, indigenous foods, and all this. And thinking about all this, it's very, very important that, especially in Africa, where we talk about our livelihoods being based on biodiversity, this is critical. Indigenous knowledge, the indigenous ways of life, and the indigenous biodiversity on which our food, our livelihoods are based on, is critical at the moment. And thinking about resilience, I work with African Biodiversity Network, and we've been thinking about this issue of resilience in the past 4 or so years. And we are finding that you cannot talk about climate resilience before you talk about community resilience and ecosystems resilience.